Interpreting. In this course, we are going to deal with another method of communication among communities speaking different languages. Basically, if two communities speaking different languages got together, there should have been a way to communicate or to facilitate their communication. Before we start, let's know what interpreting is. Interpreting is to transfer a spoken message from one language into another. In translation, we transfer a written message or text. In this sense, interpreting differs from translation in terms of the medium. Interpreting is one of the oldest practices used for communication. It's older than translation itself. But in translation, we can trace back the history of translation. Archaeologically, we may find many documents, many translated documents, or even stones, like Rosetta stones in Egypt. On the other hand, in interpreting, there was no proof left behind because it's an oral practice. Throughout history, interpreting played a vital role in different eras and for many purposes. Conquerors, missionaries, and merchants used to hire interpreters. So we have two methods of communication or for facilitating communication: interpreting and translation. So, what's the difference between translation and interpreting? Interpreting handles spoken language, while translation is text-based. In interpreting, we do the job on the spot. But in translation, we have enough time to translate and revise before submission. It's time consuming because it's a research based job. You have to be patient and perfectionist to be as accurate as possible. Accuracy in interpreting is challenging because interpreters always work under pressure. Another major difference between interpreting and translation is that interpreters must be fluent in both the source language and target language because they work to facilitate communication between the two directions. But in translation, one can choose to work from one language to another. For example, from the foreign language to his own language because he's more fluent in his own language. One more difference between translation and interpreting is that translators can use all the tools in their power. They can use, for example, references, dictionaries, CAT tools, machine translation, but interpreters, they only have the notebooks, cards, or interpreting equipment if they work simultaneously. In general, there are some skills and knowledge required in training an interpreter. Advanced language competence, memory, listening and comprehension skills, management skills, interpersonal skills, cross-cultural awareness, mastery of a specialist terminology of the event being interpreted. The most important skill of a good translator is his or her writing skills, particularly in the target language. On the other hand, interpreters should improve all the linguistic skills on an equal footing as used in the real world situations. If we look at this chart, we may notice that the most frequently utilized linguistic skill is listening, 45%, followed by speaking and they are definitely the most important skills for interpreters. In the first place, the interpreter should have the ability to listen actively and comprehend formal and informal registers in both the source and target languages. In the second place, the interpreter has to be able to speak with understandable structure and accent in the source language and also target language. But inside translating or inside interpreting, the interpreter has to have adequate reading skills in order to interpret the document in hand as fast as possible. Here are the language skills. They could be receptive or productive. Under receptive, we have got listening, reading, and under productive, we have speaking and writing. For consecutive interpreting, we have to improve our receptive skills and productive skills as well. We have to improve our listening skills, our reading skills, our speaking skills, and writing skills. But for simultaneous interpreting, we have to focus on improving listening and speaking skills. We have no time to read or write while interpreting simultaneously. Inside interpreting, there is no room for writing. So we have to improve our reading and speaking skills. Now we can have a look at the different types of interpreting. Interpreting can be divided by context into different types: conference interpreting, court interpreting, community interpreting, media interpreting, business interpreting, etc. Or by mode. So we have sight interpreting, consecutive interpreting, simultaneous, liaison interpreting, or whispered interpreting. In sight interpreting, the translator reads the source text silently and then gives the message in the target language. We often need this type of interpreting at hospitals where either doctors or patients need to know the content of medical reports written in other languages. In courts, judges would need an immediate oral translation of witness statements or other written materials. In consecutive interpreting, interpreters wait until a full sentence or a short paragraph has been spoken and then start interpreting. So we have only one speaker at a time. It involves listening to a whole chunk of words and taking notes. Once the speaker pauses or stops, the interpreter starts giving the content of the spoken message. But in simultaneous interpreting, both the speaker and the interpreter speak at the same time. But the interpreter's voice is only heard through headsets. The interpreter works in a soundproof booth for a professional performance. Liaison interpreting is also called community interpreting, dialogue interpreting, court interpreting, or public service interpreting. It's often used for community interpreting in informal situations where the interpreter liaises between two or more people as a language facilitator at the request of doctors at hospitals, lawyers at court, or any social services. Thank you for watching and see you later.